Good morning. This is Barry Knapp with Ironsides Macroeconomics. It's Monday morning, June 9th at 7 a.m. Mountain Time. One quick note, I'm wearing this reddish shirt in honor of Portugal beating Spain yesterday in the UEFA Nations League final. Lots of Portuguese buddies I played soccer with in college and then again in men's soccer, so we were full on supporting Portugal yesterday afternoon. If any of you soccer fans watched the match, it was brilliant. And Cristiano Ronaldo scoring the equalizer was pretty cool at 40 years old. So as an older guy, we're always rooting for people like that. Anyway, our note this week was titled Fiscal Food Fight. And it was a fascinating week for policy developments. We saw evidence of immigration, spending, and trade policies in the employment report. I'll get to that in a few. There were developments on the bank regulatory policy side. And of course, there was the fascinating fiscal food fight between the president and the former head of Doge, Elon Musk. We didn't really get into that fight very much in the note, but did write about the developments that are taking place. So first, on the employment report, it was a fascinating report in the parts of it that we look at, and most strategists and economists don't seem to dig into as deeply as we do, which was the flow information around it. So the details were weak, but not weak enough to change the narrative. We had written a preview note that it might be weak enough to change the narrative at the FOMC. We didn't get that because the headline numbers, even with that negative 95,000 revision to the prior 2 months, was still running 130 and change or so per month. However, when you looked at the household portion of the survey, the unemployment rate was just shy of rounding up to 4.3. It was 4.244 from 4.187. It's been rising steadily since January, since that really curious change to the population which really seemed to take place the year before, not so much in 2024. But anyway, that notwithstanding, the household survey employment dropped by 696,000. So the unemployment rate went up for the wrong reasons. And the labor force shrank by 625,000, which really gets into the interesting parts of the report. We look at something known as the job loss rate. We look at the job finding rate and the job loss rate, but the job loss rate spiked from 3.65% to 4.42%. And that was primarily because of flows from employment to not in the labor force. Could very well be workers who lost their documentation or were undocumented, just dropping out of the labor force, trying to keep a low profile so they don't get picked up by ICE. Nonetheless, it did may be putting some upward pressure on construction wages and accommodation wages, leisure and hospitality. And so that's worth watching. Now, we've been noting that the bottom quartile of wage earners have been seeing their wage growth decelerating much more quickly than any of the other quartiles since the immigration surge in 22 and 23. So we're some distance from worrying about this causing some sort of a wage price spiral, but nonetheless, it was really notable and a fascinating portion of the report. So we've broadly described it as administration's policies is starting to reduce the demand for labor, quantity of labor, and potentially stabilizing that disinflationary trend that was accelerating in the second half of last year, but may be bottoming out in the first half of this year. We've got CPI this week. We are not worried about a big upside surprise. Rent of shelter should resume its disinflationary trend. Non-housing services should be under pressure. Margins have been under pressure. The tracking estimates for CPI from the Cleveland Fed and Bloomberg, which don't get as much attention as the Atlanta Fed GDP tracking estimate, are pretty benign. So we do not think that tariff policy is going to cause some big inflationary spike. As we've been saying all along, inflation is always and everywhere a fiscal and monetary phenomenon, and we do not have the conditions in place that we had in place in 2021 for the public to be able to turn a relative change in prices into a big acceleration in the price level. So lots of interesting stuff in the notes about the interest on overnight reserves. Ted Cruz was on CNBC talking to Becky Quick about potentially taking away the Fed's ability to pay interest on overnight reserves. It got us talking about the scarce versus abundant reserve regime. The Fed is effectively destroyed, maybe an overstatement, but changed a 400-year-old interbank lending system such that they need to be at the middle of every transaction. We don't think this is a good thing for markets efficiency. There's $3 trillion sitting idly on the Fed's balance sheet that could be in the private sector spurring demand. So wrapping all this up, earnings estimates have come down, but the revisions are bottoming, and so we're not worried about that. We never cut our price target here. We still think a 10% year is the most likely outcome, and we're buyer stocks on weakness and a seller of treasuries on strength. We get quarterly refunding this week, 3s, 10s, and 30s. We'll see how all that goes. And then a Fed meeting the week after that. So interesting times. Bearing up from Ironsides. Have a good week, everyone. Thank you.